I, for one, am really looking forward to this period of question and answer with you. And I know that many of you here today will have questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, if you'd like to ask a question, please send a chat message with your question to KF Q&A. The KF team will then relay selected questions for me so I can pose them directly to Professor Schulman. And as always, there are many of us here today. Our time is short, so I apologize in advance that we won't be able to get to every question. I'd like to begin with one here that's been expressed in a few different ways by questioners writing in their thoughts so far. And that is if I can ask you to talk about a couple of lists that some audience members are curious about their relationship to this idea of the play of formulas you've raised. So some audience members have mentioned this idea of the four Dharma seals, which doesn't happen in the Pali tradition, but the idea that there are certain characteristics of the Dharma, that everything is impermanent, that things are marked by suffering, by emptiness, or by a lack of self, that nirvana is peaceful. Others have mentioned this teaching in the Sanskritic tradition, this idea of the Chatvari Pratisharanani, the four reliances upon which one can rely on a particular Buddhist teaching or judge it to be authentic or not. And then in the Pali tradition, this is something, if I recall, you mentioned in your work, a particular sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Mahapadesa Sutta, again mentions these four, one could say, great references in making a discernment about what is or is not the Dharma. And I think to put into context what's at stake for many audience members is the idea of the play of formulas and articulating the early discourses being constructed in this way is destabilizing from the perspective of those who see the discourse as the fundamental unit of Buddhist teaching. So how do you see the argument you're making around the centrality of these formulas and the way they can be recombined as related to these other kinds of Buddhist frameworks around what is or is not the Dharma? I hope that question makes sense.
Yeah, a kind of formulaic question with different elements, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much for that. The easy part is the first. Okay, so the characteristics of existence, right? So nirvana is peace. I think, I don't know, can't say this with authority, but it's more a Mahayana formulation. And in the Pali tradition, what we usually get is the tilakkhana, the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta, and anatta. Now they're all over the place, and actually they're one of the most serious formulas, which is very important for understanding the teaching. Usually it will come when the Buddha will ask someone, is, say, the I, right? I was going to quote this. Is the I permanent or impermanent? Chakkum bhikkhave nityam va anityam va. Okay? They'll say anityam bhante. Of course, it's anicca. Yampana anityam dukkham va tam sukham va. What is anicca? Is it dukkha or is it sukha? It's dukkha. Dukkham bhante. Yampana anityam dukkham viparinamantam viparinamadamam kalanuko tam samanupasati etamama esohamasmi esome attati. Is it fit? Is that which is anicca and dukkha and anatta? Is it fit to be regarded? This is mine. I am this is myself. And see, the thing about this formula, it's actually a really good example, because in certain cases, it's a very important philosophical exposition. Say Rahula, the Buddha's son. This is like how he gets liberated when the Buddha exactly shows him applies this to the eye, to the senses, and then to any experiences based on the senses. And it happens in so many places. But in other places, it's kind of used as I'd call it a kind of philosophical filler. The point is more about the narrative. And you just need a kind of, in the genre, the Buddha's got to teach something, so you just stick it in there. Or if you look at certain collections, always number 10 will be, take number 9 and replace the formula and put this one, because that's how we like to close. Because the 3 characteristics, they're really what, the Buddha, what we know the Buddha taught. And so they become a narrative element. And this is true also about different, like say, if you, this is like the lists of 9 meditative states, the 4 jhanas, the 4 formless samapatis, nirodha, cessation. Like take the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the story of the Buddha's death. They tell us that the Buddha, when he was dying, he went through the 9 states, backward, also back to the first, then back to the 4th, and then he died. Now, how do they know that? Even the text says, he didn't say anything. Okay, so maybe because these are arahants, they know other people's minds. We could maybe argue that. But nevertheless, you would kind of say they took a certain authorial liberty to use the image of these very important meditative states as a kind of characterization of consciousness in order to speak about this dramatic moment of the Buddha's death, and in order to verify the importance of this meditative scheme, which is also something that probably develops with time within the teaching, because there's lots of different samadhis that eventually made their way into these kind of fixed ways. And sometimes when we read the text, we can see the earlier kind of layers, the more original formulation. So, okay, so I hope that answers. These ideas are there, okay? And about like the Mahapadesas and the other
is the 4 reliances, these Jatuparisharana in the Sanskrit tradition.
But that's yeah. I mean because rely on the meaning, not on the words, that stuff, right? Right. Yep. So I mean, okay, that it's actually, kind of proves my point in a way, but it'd be too easy an argument for me to make because it's not really part of the early tradition. But generally, yes, I think there's something of that spirit in the tradition, right? That cares about the Dharma, doesn't care about the facts. Not that the facts are not important, but they're not as important. And for the Mahapadesas, that's a kind of, the question is, what is the tradition saying when, see the point is that some new monk will say, okay, I heard this from the Buddha or from someone else, and we'll want to check if he's serious or not. So then we'll have to compare it to the Dharma that we know or that we've accepted. And I think that the comparison would have to work with these kind of fixed utterances on a certain level. Theoretically, it could be a question of spirit. That's like, fine, that's easy to deal with. But I actually think, and I deal with this in the book, and I can't say, you read it, maybe you'll become convinced. That's one place where I'm not 100% convinced by my own kind of reasoning. I still feel there's more to be explored there, and in some of these kind of major statements of the tradition. But basically, the idea is that a certain formulation would be memorized and compared to what other people memorize, and that the fixed sequences of words are of importance. And that's basically what this doctrine is kind of trying to evoke.